Mr. Majewski's Anatomy 32 class lecture, Chapter 21, Part 1, Olfaction and Gustation. So now we're talking about the special senses. These are the senses localized to the head region, and they include gustation, which is taste, coming from the tongue, olfaction, which is smell, coming from the nose, vision from the eyes, and also hearing and equilibrium, which both are localized to the ear area. And as you can see in this cool picture, the sensory neurons all end up going through the thalamus before reaching their primary area, except for olfaction. So, olfaction, sense of smell. As you know, it's the superior portion of the nasal cavity, is where the olfactory epithelium are localized. And they then have the sensory neurons pass through the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone to finally reach the olfactory bulb, which is considered to be part of the brain. Now, the amazing thing about olfaction is that we are actually able to distinguish between 10,000 different odors. I mean, that's absolutely amazing. I can't even name, like, I don't know, 20 odors? I don't know. But we can distinguish between 10,000 through our sense of smell. So what happens? Well, first we have the olfactory receptors, as shown here as these sort of long blue cells. And it turns out the olfactory receptors are also the first order sensory neurons. So again, the dendrites of the olfactory sensory neurons have these structures called olfactory hairs or cilia that are stimulated by odorants. So what happens is the odorant molecule that you inhale through your nose will be dissolved. So that's what I was looking for. Will be dissolved in the mucus of our mucous membrane of our nasal cavity, and then they will reach the olfactory hairs that are basically part of the olfactory receptors that then will trigger a response in our sensory neuron, which is the same as the olfactory receptor. There are other cells that are involved in this tissue. There are the supporting cells. The support cells basically provide physical support for the olfactory receptors. They also provide nourishment and electrical stimulation. So basically they're taking care of the olfactory receptors, which are also the first order neurons. And then the basal cells are actually stem cells that will become either the support cells or the olfactory receptors, depending on what we need. So this is one of the few places where we can see in really quickly all the time the growth and replacement of neurons. And then finally there's the olfactory Bowman's glands. This is the glands that produce the mucus. Like I said, we have to have mucus on our mucous membrane. The odorants must be dissolved into this mucus before they can contact the olfactory hairs of our olfactory receptors. And again, the cool thing is the olfactory receptors are also the first order neurons that then have their axons stretched through the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone and then reach the olfactory bulb, which is technically a nuclei, because here the first order neurons are going to synapse with the second order, and then the second order neurons will send the signal through the brain, bypassing the thalamus. It does not go to the thalamus and instead reaches the primary olfactory area directly. That happens to be located so basically in the insula. And because it is bypassing the thalamus and bypassing the cerebellum, there are no third order somatic sensory neurons. So when I told you in chapter 20 that there's always those third order sensory neurons, it turns out here's an exception. You get the first order and the second order, and they go straight to the olfaction primary area on the cerebral cortex. All right, gustation. Gustation is the sense of taste. Turns out we have these things called taste buds scattered all over our tongue, and also it turns out in the back of our throat. And they are composed of 3 different kinds of cells that are important for the sense of taste. First, you have the basal cells. The basal cells, again, are basically a kind of stem cell, and they can differentiate into the supporting cells. So here, again, are cells referred to as supporting cells. And they surround the receptors, and they also eventually can differentiate into receptors. So in this case, the basal cells turn into support cells, and the support cells turn into receptor cells. Then you have the gustatory receptor cells. They are their own type of cell. So the gustatory receptor cells, that's their job. That's the only thing they do is detect the senses of taste. And they have a single long microvillus which will pass through the opening of the taste bud and stick out to the top of our tongue. And it is on this that the various chemicals that we sense as taste will dissolve by the saliva in our mouth and bind to the gustatory hair of the gustatory receptor cells, and then give us a sense of what we're tasting. And then the gustatory receptor cells will synapse with the first order sensory neurons. So the neurons are not the receptor cells in this case. They're two separate kinds of cells. And of course, we have only 5 tastes. There's only 5 things that we can taste in our palate of gustation, which personally is kind of sad. I mean, we got 10,000 possible things we can smell, but only 5 possible things we can taste. And these are bitter, sweet, salty, sour, and umami. Umami is one of the newly discovered tastes that we can sense, and it's more of a meaty taste. I like to think of it as a taste that you get if you chew on a piece of beef jerky for a really, really long time, and you get rid of all the other flavors. That's the thing that's left at the end is the umami. So, taste buds are on the tongue. It turns out there are 4 different kinds of bumps or papillae. 3 of them are taste buds, and 1 is just a papillae that is just a bump that has no taste receptors within it. The 3 kinds that have receptors are the valate papillae that form sort of this inverted V at the back of the tongue. Note, in the back or posterior portion of the tongue is where you find the valate papillae. Then there's the fungiform papillae that are found throughout. They are sort of mushroom shaped. And then the foliate papillae, which are only found along the lateral sides in these lateral trenches of the tongue. And depressingly enough, they're only found in children's tongues, which is so sad because children just cannot appreciate the foods they eat. Alright, so you've got 3 different nerves that carry signals of gustation to the thalamus. So in the anterior 2/3 of the tongue, you have the facial nerve that is carrying signals of gustation into the medulla oblongata, into the gustatory nucleus. And then you have the last or posterior third of the tongue's tastes being carried by the glossopharyngeal nerve. That's, again, going to the gustatory nucleus in the medulla oblongata. And finally, there turns out there are some taste buds on the back of the throat, and the vagus nerve carries that sense of taste to the medulla oblongata, to the gustatory nucleus. So these first-order sensory neurons will then synapse with the second-order neurons and carry the signal to the thalamus, and from there the secondary sensory neurons will synapse with the third-order neurons that will then carry the signal finally to the primary gustatory area of the cerebral cortex. And that's it for olfaction and gustation. I hope you enjoyed this part of the lecture.